Okay, so in week three, we're going to take a look at organizational behavior and how management thinking influences organizational behavior. So I think the first question we have to understand is, why do we have to understand organizational behavior? So I like this quote: "Understanding organizational behavior is an essential tool for managing effective teams, and it helps to inform and predict human behavior in an organization. This is at the heart of being an effective leader and manager." So when we think about our role as managers and leaders in organizations, we really need to understand how our thinking impacts the culture, the thoughts, the feelings of individuals in the organization, which in turn drives their motivation or lack thereof. So at the heart of being an effective leader and manager is to understand that our thinking, our behavior really sets the tone in an organization. And when we think about the organization, it's the individuals, it's the teams, and then it's the collective organization. So sometimes you hear people talk about that some organizations are greater than the sum of their parts. And that's really what we're after here, right? We're after putting all the parts together and making them have a shared vision and work towards a common objective in an enthusiastic and highly motivated way. So you'll see in the chapter that we're reading this week that there are models of organizational behavior, and they go across a historical spectrum where at one point there was more of an autocratic approach, and today we're thinking more in terms of systems approach. So you can look across the spectrum, but basically we've seen that we've gone from being in the thinking that we should manage organizations in a structured dictatorial way to one where we start to think that it was more of a participative way and more of an open environment, and to now where we think about things in terms of system and constant feedback and working together towards continuous improvement. And so the big question is, how do we get everybody engaged? How do we get everybody motivated? And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about this week. So certainly when we think about our philosophies, our values, our vision, our mission, this is very important because it sets the culture of the organization. And the culture of the organization really drives a lot of how employees see the organization and see themselves within the organization. So if you're working with an organization that you feel has a vision and a mission that is conducive and in line with your personal objectives and goals, then you're going to feel a lot more motivated to come to work every day and feel a lot more committed to the organization's goals and objectives. And so what we need to understand is that everything that we do in terms of our approach as managers and leaders of organization has an impact on the culture, and the culture drives a lot of how people feel about their work, and how people feel about their work is going to drive a lot about how they come to work every day, whether they're enthusiastic and looking forward to what we want to accomplish, or whether they're just for the paycheck. So if they're there just for the paycheck, then you're going to run out of gas pretty soon. But if they're there because they believe in your mission, they believe in the purpose of the organization, then you can probably get them to perform miracles. So one of the big things that comes out of our discussion so far is this idea of what motivates people, what drives human behavior. And there's this discussion about intrinsic versus extrinsic rewards. So extrinsic rewards are things like pay raise, recognition, and the like. Internal or intrinsic are what motivates people internally. Their thoughts, their feelings, their values. And so there's a growing set of evidence-based theory that says that people are more, if you want to get the most out of people, you really have to allow them to tap into their intrinsic needs, and that while the extrinsic needs are important, certain pay raise, certain position in the organization, that's only going to get us so far. If we really want to maximize performance and motivation, we have to think about what are the things that drive people internally, what makes them up. So as I mentioned, organizational behavior is heavily influenced by management thinking and behavior, or the leaders' thinking and behavior. So the question is, how has that evolved historically? So we see, as with organizational behavior, the evolution of management thinking is also evolving, right? So we went from the industrial corporation to the hierarchical leadership to collaborative management, this idea of network of teams, and now we're talking about the learning organization where we empower and give people autonomy. So we're looking at, an evolution in terms of understanding individuals and understanding how organizations best perform. And that's really what's at the heart of management and leadership. Why we study management and leadership is to understand how we can best organize and motivate people in the organization. So Peter Senge is well known. His most famous work is called The Fifth Discipline. And he's mentioned prominently in our textbook, and his main contribution at this point is something called the learning organization. And he talks about the 5 components of the learning organization, where there's a system thinking, personal mastery, team learning, mental models, and shared vision. But the main thing to keep in mind here is that when we think about the evolution of management thinking, when we think about the evolution of organizational behavior, we've moved away from this idea of the bureaucratic hierarchies or even the you do it your way approach. Now we're thinking about things in a much different perspective. And really what's key is that every organization has to view itself as a learning one. And it's important that we always view ourselves as learning because there's so many dynamics going on externally and internally. And so, and even though we want to be a learning organization, we also want to make sure that we have a shared vision and that we're constantly updating our shared vision and making adjustments to it so that everybody's on the same page. And we have to recognize that things don't happen in isolation, that if I tweak one thing, it's going to have an impact on the overall system. And so it's very important that we recognize that going forward. So as I've mentioned, what's essential is that managers and leaders need to recognize that their thinking and their behavior impacts how people perform and how the organization performs. So we have to be very cognizant of our own thinking and behavior in the organization if we want to get the results that we need. So effective leaders, effective managers, create that culture that enables people in the organizations to thrive. And there is no one size fits all because different organizations are going to have different challenges. Some organizations do need a lot of rules and structures. Other organizations need more autonomy and more freedom. So we have to assess where we are as an organization. I would say in many healthcare organizations, particularly when we're dealing with professionals, that we're really talking about a lot of autonomy and a lot of ability to offer ideas and be part of the decision-making process. So I think that when we talk about healthcare professionals, we're generally talking about people that need autonomy, job satisfaction, and the like. So Carol Dweck has made a contribution to help leaders and managers think about this idea of a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. So she's introduced briefly during our readings this week, but I've also posted some of her work from some of her YouTube presentations. She wrote a book called Mindset, which I would recommend when you have time to read it. But essentially, her thinking applies to parenting as it does to management and leadership, which is, how do we see others? Well, first of all, how do we see ourselves? Do we see ourselves as someone who's born with an innate set of skills, or do we see ourselves as someone who, if we work hard, can improve almost anything? And that in turn, drives a lot of how we approach things, challenges, efforts, and the like. And it also allows us to deal with tells us how we deal with setbacks. So if I'm somebody who has a growth mindset, I'm able to take feedback, I'm able to take a setback and bounce back because I view it as a learning opportunity. if I'm somebody with a fixed mindset, then I'm very hypersensitive to any negative feedback or any setback, because I feel as though it's a personal flaw. So if you think about this in terms of management and leadership, how do we view the organization? It will in large part determine how people feel about things. So if they know that they can make a mistake, if they know that that a failure is a learning opportunity as opposed to a career setback, then they're going to willing to take on more challenges and willing to take more risks and the like. So I think this whole thinking about fixed mindset versus growth mindset is integral to our own thinking as managers and leaders, and we have to really carefully assess, our approach to this. So I've provided a self-assessment tool that was actually published by Carol Dweck as part of the mindset thinking, and so you can do an assessment of your own thinking right now, and you may find yourself either in a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. But what you need to keep in mind is that it's an evolving thing, and that we can develop, if we want to have a growth mindset, we can develop a growth mindset. And a big part of enabling organizations is to also believe in them, that it's okay to make a mistake, and it's okay to have setbacks, and that we can learn from it and recover and move forward. So the other very interesting contribution this week is from Dan Pink, and I posted his TED Talk, which is called The Puzzle of Motivation. And this really deals with this idea of extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation. And what evidence-based studies have indicated is that we run out of gas with extrinsic-based motivation. In fact, based on his research, in 8 of the 9 tasks that they examined across 3 experiments, higher incentives led to worse performance, which is pretty startling, right? So these are external incentives as opposed to internal incentives. So his hypothesis or his findings are that autonomy, mastery, and purpose are the building blocks of the new way of doing things. So, if we subscribe to this, then we have to think about, well, how do we organize and how do we lead and manage? We provide autonomy. We allow people to master the skills that they need, and this is part of that learning and growth that we need to allow in our organizations. And then we also need to have purpose, right? People need to show up feeling like they're doing something that's worth their time and attention over the long term. Because if I'm just showing up for your paycheck, then that's eventually it's going to get old, and I'm not going to give you my best effort. But if I'm showing up because I believe in what we're doing, then that becomes something that provides a tremendous amount of motivation and also a competitive advantage. So to kind of summarize my thinking on this, it's essential that managers and leaders know that their thinking impacts organizations they lead. So we have to ask ourselves, are we allowing learning and growth among our people? Are we giving them autonomy? Do employees feel motivated, empowered? And are we limiting employees by having a fixed mindset, or do we have a growth mindset? And if we don't have a growth mindset, how do we shift to that? So the new thinking is, open communications, behavior over skill, empowerment, do something you love, be honest, open, transparent, and the whole set of things that we need to think about moving forward if we want to really get the most out of our professional workplaces.